What if time on Earth is not linear, but looping and ancient ruins are echoes of our future? Picture this. You're standing in front of the Great Pyramid of Giza, that massive monument that's puzzled humanity for over 4,000 years. The tour guide is rattling off the usual fact show. It was built for Pharaoh Khufu, how it took 20 years to construct, how it weighs 6 million tons. But then something stops you cold. You notice the precision, the mathematical perfection, the alignment with stars that won't be visible for thousands of years. And suddenly, a thought creeps into your mind, so unsettling that you try to push it away. What if this wasn't built by people looking to the past, but by people who had already seen the future? Welcome to Javis Heist, where we dive deep into the mysteries that challenge everything we think we know about our world. I'm your host, and today we're exploring one of the most mind-bending questions that's been haunting researchers, philosophers, and dreamers for decades. What if time isn't the straight line we think it is? What if it loops, cycles, repeats, and what we call ancient ruins are actually echoes of civilizations that haven't happened yet? I know it sounds impossible. Trust me, I've wrestled with this idea for months. But by the end of today's episode, you might find yourself looking at those mysterious stone circles, those impossibly precise temples, and those artifacts that don't belong in their time periods, and wondering if they're not pointing backward in time, but forward. Let me start with something that happened to me last summer. I was visiting Stonehenge, not exactly the most original destination for someone obsessed with ancient mysteries, I'll admit. But standing there in that circle of massive stones, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. Two archaeologists were discussing recent discoveries. Radiocarbon dating had revealed something strange. Some of the organic materials found at the site were showing inconsistent ages, not just off by a few years, but off by centuries. In some cases, materials buried deeper which should be older were testing younger than materials found closer to the surface. One of them joked, "It's like time runs backward here." That joke stuck with me, because what if it wasn't a joke? You see, we've been trained to think about time in one very specific way. Yesterday led to today, which will lead to tomorrow. Our past is behind us. Our future is ahead of us. It's linear, it's logical, it makes sense. But here's the thing, that's not how time actually works according to modern physics. Einstein showed us that time is relative, that it can stretch and compress. Quantum physicists talk about particles that seem to exist in multiple states simultaneously, where cause and effect get fuzzy. And some of the most respected theoretical physicists today, people like Carlo Rovelli and Brian Greene, suggest that time might not flow at all. That past, present, and future might all exist simultaneously in what they call the block universe. But let's bring this down from the realm of theoretical physics to something we can actually touch and see. Because all around our planet, there are structures that seem to know things they shouldn't know. Buildings that display knowledge their builders supposedly didn't have. Artifacts that appear in the wrong time periods. Art that depicts technologies that wouldn't be invented for thousands of years. What if these aren't mistakes in our historical record? What if they're exactly what they appear to be, glimpses of information that somehow traveled backward through time? Let me tell you about the Antikythera mechanism. In 1901, sponge divers working off the coast of Greece discovered an ancient shipwreck. Among the artifacts they recovered was a corroded bronze device that looked like nothing anyone had ever seen before. For decades, it sat in a museum, largely ignored. It wasn't until the 1970 seconds that researchers using X-ray technology finally understood what they were looking at. A mechanical computer built around 100 BC that could predict the positions of the sun, moon, and known planets with incredible accuracy. It had gear trains so sophisticated that historians thought nothing like it existed until clockmakers in medieval Europe developed similar mechanisms over 1,000 years later. The device was so advanced that one researcher called it more complex than any known device for at least a millennium afterward. Think about that for a moment. Someone in ancient Greece built a computer that was more sophisticated than anything that would exist again until the Renaissance. How? The traditional explanation is that ancient Greeks were simply more advanced than we gave them credit for. That knowledge was lost during the Dark Ages and had to be rediscovered. It's a neat explanation. It fits our linear understanding of history, but it requires us to believe that an entire technological tradition, the metallurgy, the precision manufacturing, the mathematical knowledge just vanished without a trace. But what if it didn't vanish? What if it was never supposed to exist in 100 BC in the first place? Let me share another story that's been keeping me up at night. In 1929, a German historian named Gustav Deissmann was studying medieval maps when he came across something that should have been impossible. It was the Piri Reis map, created by an Ottoman admiral in 1513. The map showed the coastlines of South America and Antarctica with startling accuracy. Here's the problem. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, and the map didn't just show Antarctica's coastline. It showed what the coastline looks like under the ice. The kind of detail that we didn't have until the 1950 seconds when ground-penetrating radar could map the actual landmass beneath the ice sheet. The official explanation? Piri Reis must have had access to older maps that have since been lost. Maps created by unknown ancient civilizations with surveying capabilities that rivaled our own satellite mapping technology. But here's what bothers me about that explanation. We're supposed to believe that sometime in the distant past, there was a civilization advanced enough to accurately map Antarctica without ice, meaning they either lived during an ice-free period that ended 34 million years ago, or they had technology capable of seeing through mile-thick ice sheets. This civilization was so advanced that their maps remained accurate for thousands of years, surviving through multiple transfers and copies, only to surface in the hands of a 16th century Ottoman admiral. And then this civilization just disappeared, left no other trace, no cities, no technology, no written records, just some really good maps. Or, what if the information on those maps came from a time when we actually could map Antarctica accurately? What if it came from our future? I know how that sounds. I really do. But stay with me, because the examples keep piling up. In the 1940 seconds, archaeologist Waldemar Julesrud discovered thousands of clay figurines near Acámbaro, Mexico. Carbon dating placed them around 2500 BC. Nothing unusual about that except for what the figurines depicted. Dinosaurs. Detailed, anatomically correct dinosaurs that weren't supposed to be known to humans until paleontology developed in the 19th century. The mainstream archaeological community dismissed them as hoaxes, despite the fact that many of the dinosaur species depicted weren't even discovered until decades after Julesrud found the figurines. How do you fake something that hasn't been discovered yet? And then there's the mystery that really started my obsession with this whole time loop theory. The Nazca lines. Those massive geoglyphs carved into the Peruvian desert sometime between 500 BC and 500 AD. Huge drawings of animals, geometric shapes, and lines that stretch for miles across the landscape. Here's what fascinates me. The Nazca lines can only be properly viewed from the air. From ground level, they just look like random scratches in the desert. But from a few hundred feet up, they transform into perfect depictions of spiders, hummingbirds, monkeys, and other creatures. Why would a civilization without flight capability spend generations creating art that only makes sense from an aerial perspective? The traditional answer is that they were made for the gods to see from above. Religious art meant for divine eyes. But what if they weren't made for gods at all? What if they were made for us? For the people who would eventually develop flight and be able to appreciate them properly? What if the Nazca people somehow knew that someday humans would take to the skies? I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I keep coming back to one question. If time really does loop or cycle, what would that actually look like? How would information travel backward? Let me paint you a picture. Imagine you're living in the year 3024. Technology has advanced to the point where time itself has become malleable. Maybe we've learned to send information backward through quantum entanglement. Maybe we've discovered that consciousness itself can transcend linear time. Or maybe the universe naturally creates these loops, these cycles where information somehow bleeds through from one iteration to the next. Now, you're facing a global catastrophe. Climate change, nuclear war, asteroid impact. Doesn't matter what it. Island civilization as you know it is about to end. But you have this technology, this ability to send information back through time. What do? You can't send complex messages. The process doesn't work that way. You can't send back blueprints for advanced technology or detailed historical accounts. But you can send impressions, images, mathematical relationships. You can influence dreams, inspire visions, guide intuitions. So you choose key moments in the past. Moments where small inspirations might create lasting monuments that will survive through the dark ages that are about to come. You inspire the builders of the pyramids to encode mathematical constants that won't be discovered for thousands of years. You guide the Nazca people to create patterns that will only make sense to an aerial civilization. You influence ancient metallurgists to create devices like the Antikythera mechanism. You're not trying to change history, you can't. Time is a loop, remember? Everything that happened is going to happen again. But you can leave breadcrumbs, clues, evidence that maybe, just maybe, the next iteration of human civilization will recognize and understand. You're creating a message that says, we were here. We reached this level. You can too. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like science fiction, and maybe it island. But consider this. Some of the most brilliant minds in modern physics are seriously considering models where time might be cyclical. The Big Bang Theory suggests our universe had a beginning. But what if it also has an end? And what if that end is also a beginning? Some cosmologists propose models of a big crunch followed by another big bang. An eternal cycle of expansion and contraction, where each universe is slightly different from the last, but contains echoes of what came before. In these models, information doesn't necessarily die when a universe ends. Quantum information might persist through the collapse and expansion cycle. What we call ancient mysteries might actually be quantum echoes from previous iterations of reality. And then there's the consciousness question. We still don't really understand what consciousness is or how it works. We know it emerges from the brain somehow, but the hard problem of consciousness, why we have subjective experiences at all, remains unsolved. What if consciousness isn't just an emergent property of complex neural networks? What if it's something more fundamental? Something that can exist independently of physical brains, at least under certain conditions? There are documented cases of people having experiences during near-death episodes that shouldn't be possible if consciousness is purely brain-based. They report detailed, coherent experiences while their brains show no activity. They sometimes report information they couldn't have known through normal sensory channels. I'm not saying these experiences prove anything definitive about consciousness surviving death or existing outside of time. But they do suggest that our understanding of consciousness and its relationship to physical reality is far from complete. What if some individuals throughout history have been naturally sensitive to information from other time periods? What if the builders of these mysterious monuments weren't receiving divine inspiration, but were actually picking up quantum echoes from future iterations of human civilization? Once you start looking for this pattern, you see it everywhere. And I mean everywhere. Take the ancient Sumerian texts. They describe the Anunnaki beings from the stars who brought knowledge to humanity. These texts contain surprisingly accurate astronomical information. They describe the solar system with 9 planets, including outer planets that weren't discovered until the 18th and 19th centuries with powerful telescopes. Traditional interpretation? Either the Sumerians had better observational skills than we thought, or they were visited by actual extraterrestrials. But what if the beings from the stars were us? What if future humans, facing extinction, found a way to send critical information back to the dawn of recorded civilization? Consider the precision of ancient megalithic sites around the world. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, built around 9,500 BC, features stone circles with astronomical alignments that are accurate to fractions of a degree. Sacsayhuaman in Peru has stone walls with blocks that fit together so precisely you can't slip a knife blade between them. These sites required engineering knowledge that we associate with modern civilization. The conventional explanation is that ancient peoples were more sophisticated than we give them credit for. But here's what bothers me. These sites don't show the usual progression you'd expect from developing civilizations. They don't start crude and get better over time. They start out perfect. It's like someone had complete knowledge from the beginning and was working backward from a finished design. And then there are the myths themselves. Every ancient civilization on Earth has flood stories. Not just simple floods, but world-ending deluges that wiped out previous civilizations. The details vary, but the core narrative is remarkably consistent across cultures that had no contact with each other. Noah's flood, Gilgamesh, the Hindu Pralaya, the Greek myth of Deucalion, Aztec and Mayan flood, legends all describing the end of one world and the beginning of another. Traditional scholarship explains these as folk memories of actual flood events, probably related to the end of the last ice age when sea levels rose dramatically, and that probably is part of it. But what if these stories are also describing something else? What if they're cultural memories of cyclical time itself, the end of one iteration of reality and the beginning of the next? I spent weeks researching this, and I found something that gave me chills. Many of these flood myths don't just describe destruction, they describe preservation. Someone or something ensuring that knowledge survives the transition, Seeds are saved, animals are preserved, key individuals are chosen to carry wisdom forward. What if these myths are describing exactly what I theorized earlier? Future civilizations sending information back through time to ensure that critical knowledge survives the cycle? Let me tell you about something that happened to me while I was researching this episode. I was reading about the Hopi prophecies, Native American traditions that describe the end of the fourth world and the beginning of the fifth world. According to these prophecies, we're living in the transition period right now. The prophecies describe signs that would herald this transition: seas turning black, the earth growing hot, flying shields appearing in the sky. When these prophecies were recorded, they seemed mythical. But reading them today, they sound like descriptions of oil spills, climate change, and aircraft. But here's the thing that really got to me. The prophecies also describe how knowledge would be preserved through the transition. They talk about the return of the blue star Kachina and the revelation of ancient wisdom that was hidden during the fourth world. As I was reading this, I realized I was looking at a description of the exact phenomenon I've been investigating: the idea that ancient wisdom knowledge from previous cycles would resurface just as this world cycle was ending. And that's when it hit me. What if I'm not discovering this pattern? What if I'm remembering it? Now, I know I need to address the elephant in the room. Everything I've described so far sounds like speculation at best, fantasy at worst. So let me ground this in some actual science, because there are legitimate scientific frameworks that could support some version of cyclical time. First, there's quantum mechanics. At the quantum level, particles don't behave like little billiard balls following predictable paths. They exist in states of superposition, multiple possibilities, existing simultaneously until observation collapses them into a single state. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that all possible futures exist until conscious observation selects one. But here's where it gets interesting for our purposes. Quantum entanglement shows us that particles can be connected across space in ways that seem to transcend normal causality. Information shared between entangled particles appears to travel faster than light, which according to relativity means it might travel backward in time under certain conditions. Dr. John Wheeler, one of the most respected physicists of the 20th century, proposed the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment, which suggests that present observations can retroactively determine past events. If this interpretation is correct, then information can indeed flow backward through time at the quantum level. Now, scaling up from quantum mechanics to macro-scale phenomena is a huge leap, and I'm not claiming it's definitively possible, but it's not definitively impossible either. We simply don't understand enough about consciousness, time, and information to rule it out completely. Then there's cosmology. As I mentioned earlier, some models suggest the universe might be cyclical rather than linear. The Big Bang might be followed by a big crunch, which triggers another Big Bang. In these models, called cyclic cosmology or conformal cyclic cosmology, information from one cosmic cycle might persist into the next. Sir Roger Penrose, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2020, has proposed that we might actually be able to detect evidence of previous cosmic cycles in the cosmic microwave background radiation, the afterglow of the Big Bang. He calls these hypothetical traces Hawking points, and he believes he's already found some candidates. If Penrose is right, then we're not just living in one universe, we're living in the latest iteration of an infinite series of universes, each carrying forward traces of what came before. But there's another scientific framework that might be even more relevant: complexity theory and emergence. Complex systems, whether they're ant colonies, ecosystems, or human civilizations, sometimes display properties that seem to transcend their individual components. Information can flow through these systems in ways that appear almost mystical. Consider how cultural knowledge persists and evolves. No individual human knows how to build a computer from raw materials, but collectively, we maintain this knowledge across generations. Information persists in the cultural system even as individual humans die and are born. What if human civilization itself is a complex adaptive system that can maintain information across much longer timescales than we realize? What if there are mechanisms, genetic, cultural, or even quantum, that allow crucial information to persist through civilizational collapse and renewal? And then there's the simulation hypothesis. Philosophers like Nick Bostrom argue that if advanced civilizations develop the ability to run detailed simulations of their own history, then statistical probability suggests we're more likely to be living in one of those simulations than in base reality. If we are living in a simulation, then the ancient mysteries might be features programmed into the simulation by our future selves. Easter eggs left by programmers who are actually us, just from a much more advanced stage of development. I'm not saying any of these explanations is definitely correct, but what I am saying is that modern science provides multiple frameworks that could theoretically support the idea of cyclical time and backward-flowing information. I need to be honest with you about something. When I started researching this topic, I was skeptical. I mean, really skeptical. I've always been drawn to mysteries and unexplained phenomena, but I'm also a critical thinker. I don't want to believe in something just because it's exciting or comforting. But the more I dug into this, the more the evidence seemed to point in the same direction. Not proof, I want to be clear about that, but a consistent pattern that's hard to dismiss. And then something personal happened that I can't ignore. 3 months ago, I had the most vivid dream I've ever experienced. I was standing in what looked like a modern city, but somehow ancient at the same time. The buildings were made of stone, but they had a quality of light and airiness that seemed impossible. People were moving around me, but I couldn't quite focus on them. In the center of the city was a massive spiral structure, like a tower that twisted up into the sky, and somehow, in the dream, I knew exactly what it was for. It was a kind of antenna designed to send information backward through time. The spiral shape created a specific geometric relationship with space-time that allowed quantum information to flow in reverse temporal directions. I woke up with complete technical specifications in my head: mathematical relationships, engineering principles, even specific materials that would be needed for construction. It was far beyond my actual knowledge of physics or engineering. Now, I'm not claiming that dream was a supernatural revelation. Dreams are weird, and our brains can synthesize information in unexpected ways during sleep. Maybe I had absorbed more technical information during my research than I realized, and my subconscious was just recombining it in creative ways. But here's what I can't shake. The design I dreamed about was based on mathematical principles that I had to research after I woke up. Principles I didn't know before the dream. And when I looked them up, they were real, valid approaches to manipulating space-time geometry. How did my subconscious mind come up with correct mathematical relationships that I didn't previously know? I've been thinking about this a lot, and I keep coming back to one possibility that both thrills and terrifies me. What if the reason I'm so drawn to this topic What if the reason you're listening to this podcast right now? What if all of our interest in ancient mysteries and unexplained phenomena, what if it's not random curiosity? What if we're the ones who are supposed to receive these messages? Think about it. If future humans really are sending information back through time, they would need receivers. People who are naturally drawn to look for patterns, to question official explanations, to piece together clues that others might dismiss. What if that's us? What if we're the antenna, tuned to pick up signals from tomorrow? I know how that sounds. Trust me, I know. But I can't shake the feeling that there's something more to all of this than academic curiosity. There's an urgency to it, like time is running out to understand something crucial. And maybe that's exactly the point. So, where does this leave us? If even a fraction of what I've described is true, what does it mean for how we understand ourselves and our place in history? First, it means we might not be the first iteration of human civilization. We might be the latest in a long series of rises and falls, each building on quantum echoes from the last. The ancient mysteries aren't relics of primitive peoples, they're breadcrumbs left by previous versions of us. Second, it means our current moment in history might be far more significant than we realize. If we really are approaching the end of this cycle, then the choices we make now might echo backward and forward through time in ways we can't imagine. Third, it means the future isn't fixed. If consciousness can truly transcend linear time, if information can flow backward through quantum channels, then maybe we can actually influence our own past. Maybe the ancient mysteries we're discovering today are the result of choices we haven't made yet. But here's what really keeps me up at night. What if we're running out of cycles? Think about it this way. If each iteration of civilization rises a little higher than the last, building on the quantum memories of what came before, then eventually we might reach a point where the cycle breaks, where we become advanced enough to transcend cyclical time altogether. What if that's what's happening now? What if we're the iteration that's supposed to figure this all out and break free from the loop? That would explain the urgency I keep feeling. It would explain why so many ancient mysteries are being uncovered or re-examined right now. It would explain why interest in these topics seems to be accelerating at exactly the moment when our technology is advanced enough to potentially validate or debunk them. And it would mean that this conversation we're having right now, this exploration of cyclical time and ancient mysteries, isn't just intellectual curiosity, it's part of the process. It's how this iteration of human civilization starts to remember what previous iterations knew. We might be living through the moment when the loop finally starts to close, when past and future finally meet in present understanding. I want to end with a question, not an answer. Because honestly, I don't have definitive answers. What I have are observations, patterns, possibilities, and a growing sense that reality is far more mysterious and interconnected than our conventional understanding suggests. So here's my question for you. When you look at the ancient mysteries we've discussed today, the impossible precision of the pyramids, the anachronistic knowledge encoded in medieval maps, the artifacts that don't belong in their time periods, what do you see? Do you see the achievements of ancient peoples who were more advanced than we've given them credit for? Do you see evidence of lost civilizations with knowledge that surpassed our own? Do you see proof of extraterrestrial intervention in human affairs? Or do you see something else? Do you see echoes? Messages? Breadcrumbs left by versions of ourselves from futures that haven't happened yet, or pasts that have already forgotten themselves? I don't know which explanation is correct. Maybe none of them are. Maybe the truth is something we haven't even imagined yet. But I do know this. The questions themselves are valuable. The willingness to look beyond conventional explanations, to consider possibilities that challenge our basic assumptions about reality, that's how we grow as a species. And if there really is a message encoded in these ancient mysteries, if future humans really are trying to communicate backward through time, then maybe the most important thing isn't decoding the specific content of that message. Maybe the most important thing is learning to listen, learning to pay attention to the anomalies, the patterns, the things that don't quite fit, learning to trust our intuition when it tells us there's more to the story than what we've been told. Because if consciousness can truly transcend linear time, if we really are connected across the centuries by invisible threads of quantum information, then every moment we spend questioning, exploring, and wondering might be contributing to a conversation that spans millennia. That's all for today's episode of Javis Heist. I hope I've given you some new perspectives to think about, and maybe even some new questions to ask yourself the next time you encounter something that doesn't quite fit the official story. I'd love to know what you think about all of this. Do any of these ideas resonate with you? Have you had your own experiences with seemingly anachronistic knowledge or unexplained insights? Have you ever felt like you were remembering something instead of learning it for the first time? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you know someone who might be interested in this kind of deep dive into the mysteries of time and consciousness, please share this episode with them. These conversations are too important to have alone. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to Javis Heist and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming explorations into the unexplained. Next week, we're diving into another mystery that challenges everything we think we know about history. The global network of megalithic sites that seem to be connected by ley lines and geometric relationships that span continents. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Until then, keep questioning, keep wondering, and remember the most important discoveries often come from looking at familiar things with fresh eyes. This has been Javis Heist. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next mystery.